My name is Helena, 35, and I've spent my entire life trying to measure up to my mother's impossible standards. The kitchen timer rings as I check the turkey, hoping this Thanksgiving will finally be different. My fiancé Mark squeezes my shoulder, his presence a reminder that I'm no longer that little girl desperate for approval. But as I smooth my dress and apply another coat of lipstick, I can already hear my mother's criticisms before we've even arrived. What I didn't know is that this holiday would change everything between us forever. Before I share what happened at that fateful dinner, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories about family healing and growth. The drive to my parents' suburban home in Wellesley always feels like traveling back in time. As Boston's skyline disappeared in our rearview mirror, I felt my confidence shrinking with each passing mile. Mark noticed my white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel and placed his hand gently over mine. "They're going to love me," he said with that easy smile that had first drawn me to him 2 years ago at a charity auction. "And if they don't, we'll still be engaged when we drive home tonight." I tried to match his optimism, but 12 Thanksgivings as an adult hadn't erased 35 years of trying to earn my mother's approval. As a successful interior designer with my own firm in Boston, I should have felt secure in my accomplishments. My latest project, redesigning the historic Whitmore Hotel's lobby, had been featured in Architectural Digest, but nothing I achieved ever seemed to impress Dorothy Wilson. "I just want one peaceful dinner," I said, turning onto Maple Street where I'd grown up. "No criticisms about my career choices, my appearance, or now my choice in partners." Mark squeezed my hand. "Helena, I build firewalls for banking systems. I'm practically designed to be parent-approved." His computer engineering background was indeed impressive, but my mother had mastered the art of finding flaws in flawless things. It was her superpower. The two-story colonial looked exactly as it always had: immaculate lawn, despite November's chill symmetrical wreaths on the windows, and not a shingle out of place. My father's Lincoln sat in the driveway, recently washed despite the forecast for snow. Everything in its perfect place, just as mother demanded. "Your childhood home is beautiful," Mark said as I parked behind my father's car. "It's a showcase, not a home," I replied, then immediately felt guilty. Dad tries his best to make it warm, but Mom runs a tight ship. We gathered our contributions, a bottle of expensive Cabernet homemade cranberry sauce, and my signature pumpkin cheesecake, before walking the stone path to the front door. I'd spent 3 hours on that cheesecake, following my grandmother's recipe with a few personal touches. Mother would still find something wrong with it. The door opened before we could ring the bell. Dorothy Wilson stood there, tall and elegant in a cashmere sweater and pearls, her silver-streaked dark hair perfectly coiffed. At 63, she still intimidated me with a single glance. "Helena, you're 7 minutes late," she said instead of hello, her eyes sweeping critically over my burgundy wrap dress. "And you look tired. Those clients of yours must be working you too hard." Not even through the door, and it had begun. "Traffic was heavier than expected, Mother," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 just as she had my entire life. "This is Mark Hansen, my fiancé." Mark stepped forward with his most charming smile, extending the wine. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wilson. Helena speaks so highly of you." That was a generous stretch of the truth, but Mark was nothing if not diplomatic. Mother accepted the wine with a thin smile. "Cabernet James prefers Merlot, but this will do. Come in before you let all the heat out." The house was a museum to Mother's perfect taste: cream walls, antique furniture too uncomfortable to actually use, and family photos where everyone smiled identical smiles. I noticed my college graduation photo had been replaced with one of my brother Liam receiving an industry award. Dad emerged from his study, his face lighting up when he saw me. James Wilson had always been the buffer between Mother's cold perfectionism and the rest of the world. A retired English professor with kind eyes and a perpetual slight stoop, as if constantly apologizing for taking up space. "There's my girl," he said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. "And this must be the famous Mark." The men shook hands, and I felt a fraction of my tension ease. Dad had always been my ally, though a passive one who rarely stood up to Mother. James, show Mark to the living room while Helena helps me in the kitchen, Mother commanded. Not a request, never a request. I'd be happy to help too, Mark offered, always eager to be useful. Mother looked at him as if he'd suggested cooking the turkey with a flamethrower. Men in my kitchen, I think not. Helena knows how I like things done. That was partially true. I knew Mother's exacting standards because I'd spent my childhood failing to meet them. As we entered the kitchen, the familiar knot formed in my stomach. The space was spotless ingredients measured in identical glass bowls like a cooking show where nothing could go wrong. You can start on the green beans, she said, pointing to a pile of fresh beans. And tell me about this Mark. Computer programmer, you said. Not very creative, is it? Engineer, I corrected, washing my hands. He designs security systems for financial institutions. He's brilliant at it. Mother made a non-committal sound as she checked the turkey. Liam's bringing Sophia again. Did I tell you she's been offered a position at Massachusetts General Chief Resident in Neurosurgery by 30? Quite impressive. And there it was, the comparison. My brother Liam, 2 years younger and infinitely more perfect in Mother's eyes, was a successful investment banker. His girlfriend Sophia was clearly Mother-approved, unlike my previous boyfriends. Or Mark, apparently. As I trimmed the beans, a memory surfaced of being 8 years old in this same kitchen trying to help with Thanksgiving dinner. I'd dropped a crystal serving dish, shattering it across the tile floor. Mother hadn't yelled. She never yelled, but her disappointed silence had been worse. This is why we can't have nice things when you're around Helena, she'd finally said. I'd spent the rest of the day in my room, dinner delivered on a tray by my apologetic father. I was so lost in the memory that the knife slipped, nicking my finger. Careful, Mother snapped, whisking a paper towel around my finger. Honestly, Helena, you're not focusing. This is why your designs always seem rushed. The small cut stung, but her words cut deeper. She'd never visited my studio, never seen my process yet, felt qualified to critique my work. My designs won the Northeast Design Association Award last spring, Mother, I said quietly, applying pressure to my finger. Yes, well, there's a lot of politics in those things, isn't there? She turned back to her perfect turkey, dismissing both my accomplishment and my injury in one breath. I heard the front door open, and Liam's booming voice filled the hallway. Perfect timing as always. Family, we're here. Mother's face transformed, lighting up with genuine pleasure as she hurried to greet her favorite child. I stayed behind, finding a bandage in the drawer that had always held first aid supplies. Some things never changed. I took a deep breath and prepared to face the next act in our family's holiday tradition, the Liam Show, co-starring his mother's unconditional approval. The temperature in the house seemed to rise 10 degrees with Liam's arrival. My brother burst into the kitchen like a celebrity entering his fan club meeting, arms wide, perfect white teeth gleaming. At 33, he still had the golden boy charm that had gotten him out of trouble throughout childhood while I took the blame. There's my big sister, he boomed, pulling me into a cologne-scented hug. Looking gorgeous as always. That color suits you. Behind him stood Sophia, tall and elegant in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She offered a genuine smile and a gentle hug. Helena, it's so good to see you again. I loved that restaurant you recommended last time. Before I could respond, Mother inserted herself between us, practically glowing as she fussed over Liam's tie. Darling, you look tired. Those Wall Street hours are too much, she cooed, the same observation that had been a criticism when directed at me. Come see what I've done with the dining room. I've used the Hawthorne china you gave me for my birthday. Liam winked at me over Mother's shoulder as she led him away, Sophia following dutifully behind. The message was clear. The important people were leaving the kitchen. Mark appeared in the doorway, looking slightly shell-shocked after 15 minutes alone with my father. Your dad showed me his first edition Hemingway collection, he said, wrapping an arm around my waist. He also warned me that your mother will ask about my 5-year career plan within the first 30 minutes of dinner. How accurate is that timeline? I laughed despite myself. He's being generous. I give it 15 minutes tops. Mark noticed my bandaged finger and frowned. What happened? Just a small cut. Mom pointed out it was due to my general carelessness and lack of focus, which apparently also plagues my professional work. His jaw tightened. Helena, that's not okay. It's just how she is, I said, the explanation I'd been giving my entire life. Come meet Liam and Sophia before Mother adopts them both and disowns me. We joined the others in the dining room, where Mother was explaining the provenance of her silverware to a politely interested Sophia. Dad stood by the bar cart pouring generous glasses of scotch. Mark Scotch. Dad offered, clearly having decided alcohol was the only way through this gathering. Please, Mark said, accepting the tumbler gratefully. Mother looked up, seeming to notice Mark for the first time since his arrival. So Mark, Helena tells me you work with computers. And so began the interrogation. Where did he attend school? What were his parents' professions? Did he own or rent? Each question delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. Mark answered each question perfectly, his responses thoughtfully measured. He was charming without being ingratiating, confident without arrogance. I felt a surge of pride watching him navigate my mother's social obstacle course. Then Liam cleared his throat. Before we get too far into dinner, I actually have some news. Mother's attention snapped to him like a compass finding north. What is it, darling? Peterson and Wallace offered me a senior vice presidency, he announced. I'll be heading their Asia-Pacific investment division. Mother actually clasped her hands together in delight. Liam, that's wonderful news. Dad stepped forward to shake his hand. Congratulations, son. That's quite an achievement. The next 10 minutes were dedicated to detailed questions about Liam's new position salary package and whether the firm would provide housing in Hong Kong. Mother was practically vibrating with pride. When the conversation finally exhausted the topic of Liam's brilliance, I saw an opening. I actually have some news too, I said, feeling Mark's encouraging hand on my back. The Whitmore Hotel project was featured in Architectural Digest last month. They did a 6-page spread. There was a brief pause. That's nice, dear. Mother said, her tone suggesting I'd announced I'd found a penny on the sidewalk. Liam, tell everyone about the apartment the firm is providing. I felt my face flush as my news evaporated like it had never been spoken. Mark's hand tightened slightly on my back. Actually, he said, his voice calm but firm, it was more than nice. Helena's design was selected from over 50 submissions, and the magazine called her work revolutionary in hospitality spaces. It's a significant achievement in her field. Mother blinked, seemingly surprised that someone had contradicted her dismissal. Dad looked uncomfortable, while Liam and Sophia exchanged glances. Well, Mother finally said, I suppose those magazine people need to fill pages with something. Shall we move to the table? The turkey will get cold. As we took our seats, I caught Sophia's eye. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile. It was the look you give someone when you've witnessed their public humiliation, but aren't close enough to acknowledge it directly. The turkey was carved, sides were passed, and conversation settled into safer territory, local news, weather, and Dad's golf game. I pushed food around my plate. Appetite diminished while Mark chatted amiably with my father about fishing spots on Cape Cod. Then Mother turned this conversation back to Mark and me. So have you set a date for this wedding? Helena isn't getting any younger, you know. And just like that, we were back in dangerous waters. We're thinking spring after next, I answered, trying to keep my voice light. We want to take our time planning. Mother raised an eyebrow. At your age, Helena, most of your peers have children in elementary school by now. Mark smoothly interjected. We've both been focused on our careers. Building something solid before starting a family seemed responsible. Speaking of starting a family, Liam said, reaching for Sophia's hand on the table, we might have some news of our own soon. Mother's face lit up like a Christmas tree. Sophia, are you? Sophia laughed, shaking her head. No, not yet, Mrs. Wilson, but we've been discussing it more seriously lately. Well, with your genetics and Liam's, those would be exceptional children, Mother beamed. Imagine intelligent, attractive, and from good stock on both sides. The implication that Mark and I would produce inferior offspring hung in the air like stale perfume. I gripped my fork tighter, focusing on my barely touched plate. Helena was always playing mother as a child. Mother continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension, though she did once leave her favorite doll out in the rain. I wondered then if she had the natural maternal instinct. "I was 7, Mother," I said quietly, "and you threw the doll away before I could try to clean it." "It was ruined," she dismissed with a wave. "The point is, some women are naturally nurturing and some have to work at it." Mark's knee pressed against mine under the table, a silent show of support. I appreciated it, but the familiar knot in my stomach was growing. Dad attempted to change the subject. "Mark, Helena mentioned you enjoy sailing. I used to take the kids out on the lake every summer." Before Mark could respond, Mother jumped in. "Liam was a natural sailor. Helena got seasick and cried to come back to shore after 20 minutes. "That's not exactly how I remember it," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "I got seasick once when there was a storm warning and you insisted we go out anyway." Mother's lips thinned. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic. It was barely a sprinkle." "It was a thunderstorm, Dorothy," Dad said quietly. "The harbor master called us in." A flash of surprise crossed my face. Dad rarely contradicted Mother's revised histories. She looked momentarily flustered, then recovered with practiced grace. "Well, that was 30 years ago. Helena, you never did tell me what happened with that Riverside apartment project. The one for that tech entrepreneur, did they go with someone else's design?" The abrupt subject change was transparent, but the question was a landmine. The client had indeed gone with another firm after initially choosing mine, a rare professional disappointment I hadn't shared with my family. "How did you know about that?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Cynthia Blackwell's daughter works for that architecture magazine. She mentioned it at bridge last week." Mother took a delicate bite of turkey. "She seemed to think you'd been too experimental with the concept." Of course. Mother's network of society friends and their daughters who always seemed to have adjacent careers to mine. The project had fallen through because the client's funding had changed, not because of my design, but Mother had already constructed her preferred narrative. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "the client loved my design. His venture capital round came in under projections, so he scaled back the entire project. If your design had been more practical, perhaps they could have afforded it," Mother suggested, as if it were helpful advice rather than a barb. I felt something shift inside me, a tiny crack in the dam I'd built to contain decades of hurt. "That's not how architecture budgets work, Mother. But you've never actually asked about my process, have you?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Liam cleared his throat and launched into a story about a client in Tokyo, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. Mother allowed the subject to change, but her eyes remained on me, assessing. As we moved to dessert, I brought out my pumpkin cheesecake alongside Mother's traditional apple pie. The cheesecake had been a labor of love, grandmother's recipe, with my own addition of candied ginger and a ginger snap crust. "I don't know why you insist on changing perfectly good recipes," Mother said as I sliced it. "Your grandmother won blue ribbons with her original version." "I'm not changing it, I'm building on it," I replied, sliding a piece onto a dessert plate. "Recipes evolve, Mother." "Some traditions shouldn't be tampered with," she countered. "When you have your own family, you'll understand the importance of preserving what works." I handed the plate to Mark, who accepted it with a smile that conveyed both support and caution. He knew I was reaching my limit. "I plan to incorporate family traditions," I said carefully, "but I also want to create new ones. Mark and I have discussed this for our future family." "Assuming you have one," Mother said, her voice deceptively light. "At 35, your chances diminish every year. But I suppose if you'd focused on family earlier, instead of rearranging furniture for a living." The crack inside me widened. "Interior design isn't rearranging furniture, Mother. It's creating functional, beautiful spaces that improve people's lives," I said, my voice steady, despite the anger building inside. "And we will have children when we're ready, not based on your timeline." "I'm simply being practical," she replied. You've always lived in a fantasy world, Helena. It's why you struggled so much as a child. I struggled because nothing I did was ever good enough for you. I said the words escaping before I could stop them. The table went silent. Dad stared at his plate. Liam and Sophia exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mark's hand found mine under the table. Mother set down her fork with deliberate care. That's ridiculous. I only ever wanted you to reach your potential. If you perceive that as criticism, perhaps you should have tried harder. I spent my entire childhood trying harder. I said, feeling the dam beginning to break. I got straight A's, learned piano, captained the debate team, all things you suggested. But the goalposts kept moving. Now you're being childish, Mother said dismissively. This is hardly appropriate dinner conversation. When is it appropriate, Mother, you shut down every attempt I've made to discuss our relationship? What is there to discuss? I raised you, fed you, clothed. You paid for that art school you insisted on attending instead of a proper university like your brother. RISD is one of the top design schools in the country, I countered, heat rising in my face. And look where it got you, designing hotel lobbies and complaining about your mother at Thanksgiving dinner. She turned to Mark. I apologize for my daughter's behavior. She's always been overly sensitive. Something in me snapped at her apology to Mark, as if I were a misbehaving child rather than a grown woman trying to address decades of emotional neglect. I've been in therapy for 2 years. Mother, working through the damage your constant criticism has caused. I said, my voice surprisingly calm, given the hurricane inside me. Dr. Levine calls it emotional neglect when a parent consistently dismisses a child's feelings and achievements. Mother's face flushed with anger. Therapy, blaming your parents for your problems, is very fashionable these days, isn't it? In my day, we took responsibility for ourselves. I am taking responsibility for my healing, but I can't fix what I don't acknowledge. Liam shifted uncomfortably. Hey, maybe we should... No, Liam, I interrupted, surprising even myself. This needs to be said. Mother's eyes narrowed dangerously. What exactly are you accusing me of, Helena? I gave you everything. Accept acceptance. Accept unconditional love. You gave me things, Mother, not support, not validation. This is absurd, she said, her voice rising slightly. I've supported you through every flight of fancy, every impractical decision. With criticism disguised as concern, with comparisons to Liam, with constant reminders of how I've disappointed you. Helena, Dad interjected weakly, your mother loves you in her way. Her way has been damaging, I said, turning to him, and you've enabled it by never standing up to her. Mother pushed back her chair, standing abruptly. Her face had gone from flushed to pale, her composure cracking. After everything I've sacrificed for this family, she said, her voice shaking with anger, this is the thanks I get, an ungrateful daughter who throws psychological buzzwords at me instead of acknowledging all I've done. I remained seated, looking up at her. I'm grateful for the opportunities you provided, Mother, but they came with conditions. Your approval was always tied to my performance, never to who I am. She looked at me then with such cold fury that I almost flinched. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word was crystal clear. Sometimes, Helena, I wish I'd never had you. The room fell silent. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly seemed deafening. I felt the blood drain from my face as I held back tears that threatened to spill. Mark's hand tightened around mine under the table, and I could sense his body tensing, ready to defend me. Across the table, Sophia's mouth had fallen open slightly, her fork suspended midway to her lips. Liam stared at our mother in shock, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Dad looked down at his plate, his shoulders hunched in familiar defeat. Mother remained standing, her chest rising and falling rapidly, as if she too was surprised by the venom of her words. For a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Regret, perhaps, or the realization she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But just as quickly, her expression hardened into defensive pride. In that moment, I had a choice. I could react as I always had, with tears, with a hasty exit, with days of hurt followed by an eventual pretense that nothing had happened. The familiar pattern beckoned like a well-worn path. Instead, I took a deep breath. I felt Mark's steady presence beside me, reminding me that I was no longer that little girl desperate for maternal approval. I thought of Dr. Levine's words from our last session. You can't control your mother's behavior, only your response to it. I placed my napkin carefully on the table and stood up. When I spoke, my voice was steady, though my heart hammered in my chest. For 35 years, I've tried to earn your love, Mother, I said. I've twisted myself into shapes that were never meant to fit me, hoping that eventually I'd find the right one, the one that would make you proud to be my mother. Mother's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised that I wasn't crying or running from the room. What you just said, I continued, is something I've always feared you felt. Now that it's out in the open, I realize something I can stop trying to earn what you're unwilling or unable to give. I felt rather than saw Mark stand beside me, his quiet support bolstering my courage. I've built a successful business. I've found a partner who loves me for exactly who I am. I've created a life filled with friends who celebrate my successes instead of diminishing them. My voice grew stronger with each word. And I've done all of this despite not because of the way you raised me. Helena, Dad started finally finding his voice, but I held up my hand. No, Dad. You've spent decades mediating, making excuses, smoothing things over. Not today. I turned back to Mother, whose complexion had gone ashen. I'm setting boundaries now. I will no longer accept your criticism disguised as concern. I will not tolerate comparisons or dismissals of my achievements, and I will not pretend that your words don't hurt me. Mother's lips pressed into a thin line. So this is what therapy teaches: disrespect for your parents. Therapy taught me self-respect, I corrected her, and the recognition that I deserve better than what you've given me. I looked around the table at the faces of my family members, some shocked, some uncomfortable, all completely still. I'm not storming out. I'm not cutting ties. But things will be different from now on. I'm open to building a healthier relationship with you, Mother, but only if you're willing to acknowledge the damage you've caused and work to change. I placed my hand on Mark's arm. We're going to step outside for some air. When we come back, we can either continue this conversation productively, or we can finish this meal in civil silence. But the old dynamic is over. With that, I turned and walked toward the French doors leading to the back patio, Mark beside me. No one called after us. No one tried to stop us. The only sound was our footsteps on the hardwood floor and the continuing tick of the grandfather clock counting seconds in a family where time suddenly seemed to have shifted. Outside, the November air was bracingly cold. I drew it deep into my lungs, feeling lightheaded with adrenaline. Had I really just done that? Had I finally, after 35 years, stood up to Dorothy Wilson? Mark wrapped his arm around my shoulders. I am so incredibly proud of you, he whispered against my hair. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, but they weren't tears of hurt or humiliation. They were tears of release, of letting go of a burden I'd carried my entire life. I can't believe I did that, I said, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. I can, Mark said simply. You're the strongest person I know, Helena. You just needed to realize it for yourself. Behind us, the French door opened with a soft click. I tensed, expecting to see Mother's rigid form, but it was my father who stepped onto the patio, closing the door carefully behind him. Dad looked older than he had just minutes ago, the lines in his face deeper, his shoulders more stooped. He approached us cautiously, as if afraid I might flee. Helena, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I don't know where to begin. I brushed away my tears, straightening my spine. You could start with why you never defended me. The bluntness of my questions seemed to physically impact him. He winced, then nodded slowly. I deserve that, he said. And you deserve an explanation, though I'm not sure any explanation will be adequate. Mark squeezed my shoulder. Would you like me to give you two some privacy? I shook my head. Stay, please. Dad gestured to the patio furniture covered for the season but still usable. We sat the metal chairs cold through our clothing. The backyard stretched before us dormant and waiting for winter, much like the truth that was finally emerging in our family. "Your mother," Dad began, then stopped searching for words. "Dorothy wasn't always this way. When we met, she was ambitious, brilliant, driven, much like you, actually. But her own mother was—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Your grandmother Wilson was worse than Dorothy could ever be. Nothing was ever good enough, no achievement significant enough. So she became what she hated," I asked, not ready to feel sympathy just yet. "She promised herself she'd be different," Dad continued. "But patterns run deep, Helena. When you were born, you looked so much like her mother, those same green eyes, that determined little chin. I think something in Dorothy broke, or maybe awakened. She started seeing herself in you and her mother in herself. That doesn't excuse 35 years of emotional abuse, Dad." He nodded, eyes filling with tears. "No, it doesn't. And my failure to stop it is unforgivable." "I don't want to hear that it's unforgivable," I said firmly. "I want to know that you understand what went wrong and that you're willing to help fix it going forward." "I enabled her," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I told myself I was keeping the peace, that confronting Dorothy would only make things worse for everyone. But really, I was just afraid. Afraid of her anger, afraid of conflict, afraid of facing my own failures as a husband and father." A tear slipped down his weathered cheek. "I failed you, Helena. Every time I stayed silent, every time I offered comfort after the fact instead of protection during her attacks. I failed you." The raw honesty in his voice touched something in me. This wasn't the practiced apology of someone just trying to smooth things over. This was genuine remorse. "I wish I could go back," he continued. "I wish I could be the father you deserved. But I can't change the past. I can only ask for the chance to do better now." Before I could respond, the French door opened again. Liam stepped out, hands shoved into his pockets against the cold. "Room for one more in this family therapy session?" he asked, attempting humor but with real uncertainty in his eyes. I nodded and he pulled over another chair, forming our small circle in the cold. "Mom's in the kitchen," he said. "Sophia's helping her clean up, trying to talk to her. It's not going great." "Is she throwing things yet?" Dad asked with a grim smile. "Not yet, but I saw her eyeing the gravy boat," Liam replied. Then turning to me, "Helena, I owe you an apology too. I've been complicit in all this." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "I've benefited from being the favorite," he said bluntly. "And instead of questioning why Mom treated us so differently, I accepted it as the natural order. Hell, part of me probably enjoyed it." His candor surprised me. Liam and I had never discussed the obvious disparity in how Mother treated us. "You were a kid too," I said. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix our parents' behavior." "Maybe not then," he conceded. "But I'm an adult now, and I've let it continue. I've watched Mom undermine you, dismiss you, compare you unfavorably to me, and I've said nothing. Worse, I've sometimes played along." The admission hung in the cold air between us. It was true, Liam had often basked in Mother's approval, accepting her praise at my expense. Why the sudden insight? I asked, not unkindly but genuinely curious. He looked down at his hands. "When Mom said she wished she'd never had you, I saw something clearly for the first time. This isn't just strict parenting or high standards. This is something deeper and more damaging." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "And then watching you stand up to her with such dignity and clarity, I realized how strong you've had to be. How much harder you've had to work, not just for success, but for basic acceptance." Mark, who had been silent during these exchanges, spoke up. "What happens now? Where does your family go from here?" It was the question hanging over all of us. Dad looked toward the house where Mother was presumably still fuming in the kitchen. "Dorothy needs help," he said quietly. "Professional help. The kind I should have insisted on years ago." "Will she get it?" I asked, knowing how fiercely my mother resisted any suggestion of personal imperfection. I don't know, Dad admitted, but for the first time in our marriage, I'm prepared to make it a condition of our relationship continuing. Your courage has given me courage, Helena. Liam nodded. I'm with Dad on this, and I'm with you, sis. Whatever boundaries you need to set, I'll support them. The French door opened a third time. We all turned to see Sophia standing there looking uncomfortable but determined. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but Mrs. Wilson, your mother is asking if you're coming back inside. She says the pumpkin cheesecake is getting warm. The absurdity of Mother's concern for dessert temperature after what had transpired almost made me laugh. Almost. Tell her we'll be in shortly, Dad said. Sophia hesitated. There's something else you should know. I spoke with her a bit about my own family. My parents are immigrants who worked multiple jobs, and they sometimes show love through high expectations too. But I told her there's a difference between pushing your children to succeed and making them feel they're never enough. How did she take that? I asked, impressed by Sophia's courage. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something about her own mother but stopped herself. Sophia looked at me directly. I think she's scared, Helena. Scared of losing you, scared of facing herself. I don't know if that helps, but it does, I said. Thank you, Sophia. As she went back inside, the four of us sat in contemplative silence. The weight of decades of family dysfunction hung in the air, but for the first time it felt like something that could be examined rather than simply endured. We should go back in, I finally said. Running away won't solve anything. Are you sure? Mark asked. We can leave if you need to. I shook my head. I meant what I said in there. I'm not cutting ties. I'm changing the dynamic. And that starts with walking back in with my head high. Dad stood, offering me his hand. Then let's face this together, as a family should. We walked back toward the house, united in a way we'd never been before. I didn't know if Mother could change or if she even wanted to, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had changed. The little girl, desperate for maternal approval, had finally grown into a woman who understood her own worth. As we reached the French doors, I took a deep breath. Whatever awaited us inside, I was ready to face it with newfound strength and the support of people who truly loved me. When we re-entered the dining room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mother sat rigidly at the head of the table, hands folded precisely in front of her. Sophia looked up with relief as we filed back in. The desserts remained on the table untouched in our absence. Well, Mother said, her voice brittle, I suppose we should finish dessert before everything is completely ruined. I reclaimed my seat beside Mark, who kept his hand on my knee under the table. Dad and Liam exchanged glances before sitting down. Dorothy, Dad said, using a tone I'd rarely heard from him, firm, almost authoritative. I think we need to address what happened before dessert. Mother's lips thinned. James, this is hardly the time. It's exactly the time, he interrupted. Our daughter deserves better than what you said to her, what you've been saying to her for years. Mother's hands trembled slightly. She looked down at them, then back up, her gaze skating past me to land on some middle distance. Helena has always been difficult to understand, she said carefully. So different from what I expected in a daughter. Different from you, you mean, I said quietly. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Yes, different from me. And that made you uncomfortable, I continued, because you couldn't see yourself in me. I saw too much of my mother in you, she said, the admission seeming to surprise even her. Her stubbornness, her creativity, her refusal to conform. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me about our relationship. I leaned forward slightly. Grandmother Wilson was cruel to you, I said. It wasn't a question I'd picked up enough over the years to understand that much. Mother's posture stiffened further if that was possible. She had expectations, high standards. She hurt you, I pressed gently. Mother's eyes snapped to mine, a flash of raw pain visible before her walls slammed back into place. That's not relevant to this discussion. It's entirely relevant, Dad interjected. Dorothy, you've spent our entire marriage running from your mother's ghost only to become her in many ways. I am nothing like her, Mother hissed, genuine anger breaking through her composed facade. You told your daughter you wish she'd never been born, Liam said quietly. How is that different? Mother flinched as if she'd been slapped. The room fell silent again. Sophia, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Mrs. Wilson, my grandmother had a saying, pain that isn't transformed is transferred. I think about that a lot in my work with patients. Mother looked at Sophia with an expression I couldn't quite read, annoyance mixed with curiosity. And what exactly am I supposed to do with that bit of wisdom? Consider whether the pain your mother caused you is now being passed to Helena, Sophia replied evenly, and whether that's really what you want your legacy to be. It was bold, perhaps too bold for someone who wasn't family. But sometimes an outsider's perspective can pierce defenses in ways family cannot. Mother's hands fidgeted with her napkin. I've only ever wanted what was best for Helena. What was best for me, I said, was unconditional love and acceptance. The freedom to be myself, not some version of myself you found acceptable. Love doesn't mean accepting mediocrity, she countered, but with less conviction than before. My life isn't mediocre, Mother. My career isn't mediocre. My relationship isn't mediocre. The only thing that's been substandard is our relationship, and that's something we both need to work on. Mother looked directly at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You've changed, she said almost accusingly. I've grown, I corrected her. I've learned to value myself even when you don't. A tear, something I'd seen from my mother perhaps twice in my life, slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly as if embarrassed by this display of emotion. I don't know how to be different, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was such a vulnerable admission that I felt my own anger softening slightly. Not disappearing, the hurt was too deep for that, but transforming into something that left room for compassion. I've been seeing Dr. Levine for 2 years, I said. She specializes in family trauma. She could recommend someone for you. Mother stiffened again. I'm not traumatized. Dorothy, Dad said gently. You've been carrying your mother's criticism for 63 years. If that's not trauma, I don't know what is. She looked at him with a mixture of betrayal and relief. The complicated response of someone who has finally been seen but isn't sure they wanted to be. Would you consider talking to someone? I asked. Not for me, but for yourself. And maybe eventually for us. Mother was silent for a long moment, looking down at her perfectly manicured hands. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet, we all had to lean in to hear. I don't know how to be a good mother to you, Helena. I never have. The raw honesty of it broke something open in my chest, not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. You could start, I suggested, by trying to know me as I am, not as you wish I was. She nodded almost imperceptibly. I could try that. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There were no tearful embraces or profound apologies. But it was a crack in a wall that had seemed impenetrable for 35 years. A small opening through which light might eventually pass. Now, I said, picking up the cake server, who would like some of my grandmother's pumpkin cheesecake recipe with my own additions. Mother hesitated, then held out her dessert plate. I would, she said, and after a pause added, Your grandmother was never much of a baker, you know. She preferred savory dishes. It was such a small thing, a tiny personal detail about the grandmother I'd barely known offered freely instead of wielded as a comparison. But in that moment, it felt enormous. Tell me more about her, I said as I served the cheesecake. The real her, not just the accomplishments and standards. And as we ate dessert, Mother began to talk about her own mother in a way I'd never heard before, as a complex, flawed human being, rather than an impossible standard. Dad joined in with stories of when they'd first met, and even Liam shared memories of grandmother I'd never heard. It wasn't perfect, Mother still slipped into critical comments several times, but I noticed something new. She caught herself once or twice actually stopping mid-sentence to reconsider her words. When Mark and I finally left that night, the goodbye was awkward, but not hostile. Mother even made an effort to ask about his parents' upcoming visit for Christmas. In the car driving home, Mark turned to me. "Are you okay?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm processing. It doesn't fix 35 years of damage, but it's a start." He took my hand. "You were magnificent today. Truly." I squeezed his fingers, thinking about the long road ahead. Today was just the beginning. Real change will take time for all of us. "But it is possible," he said. Not a question, but a statement of faith. I thought about Mother's tear about her admission of not knowing how to be a good mother, about the tiny glimpse of the wounded woman behind the perfect facade. "Yes," I said finally. "I think it is." The weeks following Thanksgiving unfolded in ways I never could have anticipated. The morning after our confrontation, I woke to a text from my father. "Your mother has agreed to speak with someone. I've never been prouder of you, Helena." I read it to Mark as we lay in bed, sunlight streaming through our bedroom windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like the new possibilities swirling between my family members. "Do you believe she'll actually go through with it?" he asked, propping himself up on one elbow. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But the fact that she's willing to consider it is revolutionary." My phone rang later that morning, Liam calling to check in. Our conversation was different than any we'd had before, more honest, more equal. He apologized again for his role in our family dynamic and asked thoughtful questions about my experience growing up as the less favored child. "I always envied your freedom," he confessed. "Being the golden child came with impossible expectations. Every success just raised the bar higher." "We were both trapped in her expectations," I said, "just in different ways." "I've been thinking about what you said about therapy," he continued. "Sophia thinks it might be good for me too, to unpack some of this stuff." It was a small thing, but significant, my brother considering therapy, something Mother had always dismissed as weakness. The family narrative was already shifting. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I received a formal email from Mother requesting my presence at a neutral location to discuss recent events. The stiff formality made me smile. It was so typically Dorothy Wilson to approach family reconciliation like a business meeting. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably as always. But there was something different in her bearing, a slight uncertainty that I'd never associated with my perpetually confident mother. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat across from me, hands folded on the table. "Thank you for suggesting it," I replied. There was an awkward silence as we both navigated this new territory, a mother and daughter attempting conversation without the familiar scaffolding of criticism and defense. "I've had 2 sessions with Dr. Winters," she finally said. Naming a therapist I recognized as highly regarded in family psychology. She suggested I might have something called intergenerational trauma. She said the term as if it were in a foreign language, testing the shape of it on her tongue. "What do you think about that?" I asked carefully. Mother considered the question with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "I think she might be right. The things my mother said to me." She stopped abruptly, swallowing hard. "I hear them in my head sometimes, before I speak to you." It was more vulnerability than she'd shown me in my entire life. I resisted the urge to fill the silence, giving her space to continue. "Dr. Winters says I've been projecting my mother onto you, seeing you through her eyes instead of my own." She looked down at her untouched coffee. "I'm not sure I know how to stop." "It takes time," I said. "I've been working on my own patterns for 2 years." She looked up sharply. "What patterns?" "Seeking approval from everyone around me. Perfectionism. Assuming criticism even when it isn't there." I smiled slightly. "Sound familiar?" A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Your grandmother did that to me, and I did it to you." "We can break the cycle," I said. It's why I've been so intentional about preparing for marriage, about thinking about what kind of family Mark and I want to create. For once, Mother didn't comment on my age or biological clock. Instead, she asked, "What kind of family do you want?" It was such a simple question, but one she'd never asked before. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. One where accomplishments are celebrated, but not the measure of worth. Where mistakes are treated as learning opportunities, not character flaws. Where love isn't conditional on performance. I half expected her to dismiss this as naive idealism, but she nodded slowly. "Your father and I had similar conversations before you were born. We promised each other we'd be different from our parents." "What happened?" I asked gently. She looked out the window, her profile sharp against the winter light. "Fear happened. I was terrified of failing you, of not preparing you for a world that can be cruel. Somewhere along the way, I became the cruelty I was trying to protect you from." The insight surprised me, not just the content, but that Mother was capable of such self-reflection. Perhaps she always had been beneath the rigid exterior. Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But there was also something new, a willingness to pause, to reconsider, to listen. As Christmas approached, I braced myself for the traditional Wilson family gathering. To my surprise, Mother called to discuss options. "I thought perhaps we might do something different this year," she suggested. "Your home, perhaps, instead of mine. I'd like to see your space to understand your design aesthetic better." It was an olive branch, clumsily extended but genuine. I accepted. Christmas Day brought Mother and Father to our Boston apartment, Mother carrying a small, carefully wrapped package. She glanced around at my mid-century modern furnishings, the bold art pieces, the warm colors so different from her own neutral palette. "It's very, she said after a moment. Then with visible effort, "It's beautiful, Helena. Inviting." 2 compliments in succession, a Christmas miracle indeed. The gift she handed me turned out to be a photo album, one I'd never seen before. Inside were pictures of her as a young woman, before marriage, before children. Dorothy Wilson at 20, laughing on a beach. At 23, graduating college with honors. At 26, in an architect's office, bent over drafting tables. "You wanted to be an architect?" I asked, stunned by this revelation. "Interior design, actually," she said quietly. "My mother convinced me it wasn't a proper career, that I needed something more practical, more prestigious." I stared at her, pieces of a lifelong puzzle suddenly clicking into place. "You gave up your dream." "And resented you for pursuing yours," she acknowledged. "I didn't realize that until recently." It wasn't a complete transformation. Throughout the day, Mother still made several critical comments, still compared Liam's career to mine once. But each time there was a new awareness in her eyes, a catching of herself that hadn't existed before. As winter turned to spring, our relationship continued this delicate dance, steps forward, steps back, but gradually moving in a healthier direction. Mother attended therapy weekly. We had dinner together monthly. I maintained my boundaries firmly but kindly. Mark and I set our wedding date for May, and to my surprise, Mother asked if she could help with some of the planning. "Not to take over," she clarified quickly. "Just to be involved, if you want me to be." The wedding day itself was beautiful, a garden ceremony with cherry blossoms floating on the spring breeze. As I prepared in the bridal suite, there was a knock at the door. Mother entered, more hesitant than I'd ever seen her. "You look stunning," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," I replied, smoothing the vintage-inspired gown I'd designed myself. She approached slowly, holding something in her hands, a small jewelry box. "I brought you this, for your something old." Inside was a delicate pearl hairpin. It was my grandmother's, my father's mother. She was the one who encouraged my interest in design before my mother squashed it. She looked at me directly. "I want you to have it to wear today if you'd like. To remember that there have always been women in our family who believed in creative dreams." As my maid of honor fastened the pearl pin in my updo, I caught Mother's reflection in the mirror. For a brief moment, I saw her not as the critical force that had shaped my insecurities, but as a woman who had lost her own dreams and was trying, however imperfectly, to make amends. "Thank you," I said simply. She nodded, understanding that my gratitude extended beyond the hairpin. The ceremony went perfectly, Mark's eyes filling with tears as I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. During the reception, Mother surprised everyone by requesting the microphone for a toast. "Helena has always forged her own path," she said, her voice steady. "As a child, it challenged me. As her mother, I wasn't always equipped to appreciate her unique vision." She paused, gathering herself. "But today, seeing the extraordinary woman she's become, the beautiful life she's created with Mark, I can say without reservation how proud I am to be her mother." Her words weren't perfect. They didn't erase decades of pain. But they were honest, and in that honesty lay the seeds of healing. 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving, we gathered again around a table, this time in my home with my menu, my traditions blending with selected family ones. Mother brought her famous cranberry sauce, but asked for my recipe for roasted vegetables. Liam and Sophia announced they were expecting their first child. Dad looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. As we sat together after dinner, Mark's arm around my shoulders, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. Mother was not a different person. She was still exacting, still struggled with direct emotional expression, still occasionally slipped into critical patterns. But she was trying. We all were. The deepest lesson I'd learned wasn't that perfect families exist, they don't. It wasn't that confrontation magically resolves decades of hurt, it doesn't. The lesson was that courage, the courage to speak truth, to set boundaries, to remain open to change while protecting yourself, can transform even the most entrenched patterns. "What are you thinking about?" Mark whispered as the others debated the merits of various pie recipes. I looked around at my imperfect, evolving family. That sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away from what hurts you, but staying to build something better, as long as everyone is willing to do the work. He squeezed my hand. "Your courage changed everything." Not everything, I thought, but enough. Enough to break a cycle that might otherwise have continued for generations. Enough to create space for healing. Enough to allow me to finally fully become myself. And that I realized was the greatest gift I could have given myself, and perhaps in a way the greatest gift I could have given my mother too. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who hurt you with their words? What was your breaking point and how did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is set boundaries with those we love. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember that breaking generational patterns takes courage, but you are stronger than you know.